The boy was different from the others, though no one would have said it out loud. From the time he could walk, he had been fascinated by the creatures that lived on the settlement station. They were not ordinary animals. They were large, powerful, alien feline beasts, unlike anything humans had ever seen before. Their fur shimmered in strange colors under the station lights. Their eyes glowed faintly, and every movement they made seemed carefully measured, almost like a dance. While other children ran past them in fear or laughed at them, he would stop, crouch low, and watch quietly. He noticed things no one else cared about. How the tip of a tail twitched when a beast was curious, or how a low hum meant it was angry or upset. He would spend hours just sitting near them, notebook in hand, sketching their positions, marking down their sounds, and noting small changes in their expressions. To him, it was like discovering a secret world, one full of meaning, patterns, and silent rules. At school, the other children were not kind. They laughed at him when he carried his notebooks filled with strange symbols and scribbles. They called him names like weird or talking to animals. Even some of the teachers didn't understand. They would smile politely but shake their heads, saying he should focus on real lessons. But the boy didn't care. When he looked at the alien feline beasts, he felt alive. He felt like he was on the edge of discovering something amazing. His parents noticed his obsession too. They were not angry, but they were worried. "Don't spend all your time with those creatures," his father said one evening as he watched him sketching in the dim light of their quarters. "Other kids need you to play. You need friends." His mother added softly, "We know you love them, but don't forget the world around you." The boy nodded, but his mind was already back with the creatures. To him, the world outside didn't make sense yet. But the language of the beasts, the patterns, the gestures, the sounds was a puzzle he was determined to solve. Sometimes, the boy would try to mimic the beasts' movements, small gestures that he had seen them use with one another. He would curl his fingers in a certain way, tap lightly on the floor, or hum a low note that seemed to calm the younger ones. At first, the creatures ignored him. They were suspicious of humans, after all, and especially of small children. But slowly, they began to notice him. The cubs, especially, would inch closer when he was near. They seemed curious, but not afraid. One afternoon, while observing a group of adult feline beasts interacting near the outer docking area, the boy noticed something different. One of the beasts, a large one with silver stripes, was standing near a pile of machinery, and it made a series of low rumbles while swishing its tail sharply. Another beast responded by shifting its body slightly, moving its ears in a particular way. Then a small vibration ran through its body. The boy scribbled in his notebook, trying to capture each movement, each sound, and each tiny flicker of emotion in the beasts' faces. It was complicated, almost like a secret code. The more he watched, the more he realized that these creatures had a language. Not words like humans, not letters, not sentences, but a language of movements, vibrations, and sounds. Each action meant something. Tail flicks could be warnings, hums could show curiosity, and the smallest tilt of an ear might signal understanding. He was thrilled, but he kept it a secret. Other people would never believe him. The scientists on the station were busy with experiments, the adults with their own routines, and the other children with games. He was alone with his discovery, and he liked it that way. Despite his growing obsession, he still faced ridicule. One day, he tried to show a group of classmates how a small vibration could calm a cub down. The boy approached the frightened animal slowly, mimicking the patterns he had observed. The cub froze, watching him. He tapped lightly on the floor and let out a soft hum. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, the cub relaxed and even nuzzled his hand. The boy looked up at his classmates, expecting awe. But instead, they laughed. "It's just a coincidence." One shouted, "Animals do what they want." Another mocked. He felt embarrassed, but he didn't give up. The creatures had responded, and that was all that mattered to him. He began spending even more time studying them. He would stay after school, hiding near the outer corridors, scribbling furiously in his notebook. Sometimes an adult would notice him, a security officer or a scientist, and ask what he was doing. He would mumble something about patterns or signals, and they would shake their heads and walk away. The boy didn't mind. He had discovered a world that no one else saw. Nights were the most exciting. The station would quiet down, lights dim, and the boy would sneak out to the observation deck. The beasts were more relaxed at night, more playful, and their signals were easier to read. He would sit cross-legged, notebook in hand, recording each vibration, each movement, each sound. He began noticing sequences, small patterns that repeated over time. It was like learning a song he had never heard before. Sometimes he imagined conversations. What if he could ask the beasts what they were thinking? What if they could understand him too? The idea seemed impossible. Humans and alien feline beasts had coexisted on the station for years, but no one had ever bridged the gap between them. The boy felt a spark of hope. If he could understand their language, he could build a connection that no one else had even imagined. Despite all the teasing and isolation, he felt proud of himself. He was learning something important. Even when the children mocked him, calling him names like animal whisperer or creature freak, he held his head high. One day, he told himself he would show everyone that the language of these creatures was real, and that he had the skill to understand it. The boy's dedication wasn't easy. He fell, he got scratched, he was hissed at, and sometimes the cubs ran away in fear. But he never gave up. He learned to observe without disturbing, to wait patiently, to mimic without overdoing. He began noticing details that no adult seemed to see. The way the older beasts signaled warning, the way they comforted each other, the way a cub's tail would flick when it was unsure of something. Every little detail was a clue, a piece of a puzzle that he was determined to solve. Over time, a quiet respect began to grow between him and the creatures. They didn't treat him like an ordinary human. They watched him, sometimes followed him at a distance, and occasionally allowed him to sit close without fear. It was subtle, almost invisible, but the boy noticed every small gesture. He felt a deep sense of connection, even though the adults around him couldn't see it. The boy's parents watched him with a mix of pride and worry. They didn't fully understand his fascination, but they could see his determination. They knew that something extraordinary was happening, something that might change the way humans and alien feline beasts interacted. But they also worried. The settlement was unpredictable, and these creatures, though intelligent, could be dangerous if provoked. Still, they trusted his patience and careful nature, and so the boy continued his quiet studies. Every day brought new observations, new patterns, and new insights. The teasing and laughter of others faded into the background. He had a mission, a secret purpose, and a growing understanding that would one day allow him to speak a language no human had ever learned before. The boy knew that his patience and curiosity were the keys to a future that no one else could yet imagine. Little did he know, the journey he had begun would not only test his courage and intelligence, but would also change the way humans and alien feline beasts lived together forever. The first step had been taken, quietly in the shadows of the station, with only a notebook, a keen eye, and a young boy's relentless curiosity. The boy's fascination with the alien feline beasts continued to grow, but so did the mockery from others. At school, the teasing became harder to ignore. Children whispered behind his back, snickering when he passed by with his notebooks filled with strange symbols. Some would even deliberately imitate the creatures, waving their arms and growling to make the boy laugh, or more often, to make him feel embarrassed. No matter how hard he tried to ignore it, it hurt. He often wondered why his love for the beasts was seen as something to mock rather than something to admire. It wasn't just the children at school. Some adults, even those who worked closely with the settlement's creatures, were impatient with him. "Why do you waste so much time with them?" one of the station scientists asked one day while he was sketching a new pattern. "Don't you have lessons or homework or something more practical?" The boy hesitated, unsure how to explain what he was feeling. He tried to say that he was learning, that there was something important in the way the creatures communicated, but the words didn't come out right. The scientist shook his head and walked away, leaving the boy to his thoughts. Even with the teasing and lack of understanding, the boy didn't stop observing. In fact, it made him more determined. He spent hours after school watching the creatures in different areas of the settlement, taking notes on their movements, listening to the subtle vibrations they produced, and comparing what he saw with what he had recorded the day before. Sometimes he would sit so still that even the cubs would approach him without fear. They seemed to sense his patience, his quiet respect, and his willingness to learn their world. There were days when the boy felt completely alone. He wanted to share what he had discovered, but the fear of being laughed at or dismissed stopped him. Instead, he wrote long notes in his journal, describing each observation in detail. He drew diagrams of tail movements, sketches of ear positions, and even created symbols for different types of vibrations. It became a secret language of his own making, a way to remember what he had seen and to begin piecing together the larger patterns. Sometimes, though, the teasing wasn't just words. A few older children would chase him while he was observing the creatures, shouting and waving their arms to scare him away. On one occasion, they ran past him too close, startling a young cub. The cub hissed and swiped with its claws, and the boy had to step back quickly to avoid being scratched. After that incident, the boy realized that understanding the creatures was not just about learning their language. It was about learning patience, timing, and control. He had to earn their trust slowly, without rushing or forcing them to react. Despite these challenges, the boy began noticing patterns that others had missed entirely. He realized that the creature's tail flicks, ear movements, and vibrations were not random. They formed sequences, almost like sentences. One set of signals could mean, "I am curious," while another could mean, "I am frightened." He started testing his ideas by approaching a cub and mimicking certain gestures or vibrations. Sometimes it worked perfectly. The cub would stop moving, relax, or respond in kind. Other times, he misread the signals, and the cub would dash away. Each mistake taught him something new, and he learned to be careful, patient, and precise. At home, the boy's family noticed the change in him. He became quieter, more focused, and sometimes seemed lost in thought. His parents were supportive but concerned. "You spend so much time with him," his mother said one evening, watching him draw diagrams on his desk. "Are you sure this is worth it?" The boy nodded earnestly. "I think I can understand them. I think I can talk to them," he said. His parents exchanged a look. They didn't fully understand what he meant, but they could see the fire in his eyes, the determination that wouldn't be extinguished. The more he observed, the more he realized that the alien feline beasts had feelings just like humans. They could be curious, scared, playful, or protective. He noticed that a frightened cub would curl up and tremble, while a happy one would purr and rub against another. Adult beasts could be stern and serious, but they could also show affection to their young. This understanding gave the boy hope. If he could decode their signals, he could build a bridge between humans and these creatures. Despite the ridicule and isolation, the boy started to find moments of joy. He learned to predict certain behaviors, like when a cub would play or when an adult would react to a loud noise. He even started communicating in small ways, using vibrations and gestures to indicate friendliness. Slowly, The cubs began to trust him. They would approach him first, sniffing his hands or brushing against his legs. These moments were priceless, small victories that kept him going even when the world around him seemed hostile or dismissive. One day, he made a breakthrough. He noticed that when two adult beasts communicated, they often combined 3 different signals at once: a low hum, a tail flick, and a tilt of the head. Each part carried meaning, but together they formed a complete message. The boy's heart raced as he scribbled notes, realizing that he might be closer than ever to understanding a true language. It wasn't words like humans used, but it was communication complex, subtle, and entirely real. Excited by his discovery, the boy tried to demonstrate it to a small group of classmates. He showed them a sequence of gestures and sounds, and one of the cubs reacted exactly as he predicted. But instead of praise, he was met with laughter. "It's just luck," one of the older kids shouted. "You tricked it somehow." Another added, "No way, that's a language. You're making it up." The boy felt a sting of frustration and embarrassment, but deep down, he knew the truth. He had seen the patterns with his own eyes, and he had tested them countless times. The mockery couldn't erase that dot. The boy's patience became his strength. While others laughed, he continued his studies quietly, away from the crowds. He learned that the creatures responded not to force or loud commands, but to calm, gentle observation. He developed a system. He would watch carefully, mimic gestures subtly, and wait for a response. Every day brought new insights. Every observation added a piece to the puzzle. He felt like he was slowly uncovering a secret the world had never known. There were moments of doubt. Some nights, he would lie awake, wondering if he was imagining it all. Maybe the patterns weren't real. Maybe the creatures were only reacting randomly. But then, he would see a cub respond perfectly to a gesture he had practiced or an adult shift, its body in recognition of a vibration he mimicked. Each successful interaction reminded him that he was on the right path. He had a connection with the creatures that no one else had. Through all this, the boy learned a lesson that went beyond observation. He learned resilience. He learned to keep going despite teasing, despite misunderstanding, and despite fear. He learned that passion and dedication could outweigh ridicule. And most importantly, he learned to listen, not just with his ears, but with his eyes, his hands, and his mind. He was beginning to understand that communication was not just about words, but about empathy, attention, and trust. As the days passed, the boy noticed another remarkable thing. The more time he spent observing, the more the cubs seemed to seek him out. They would follow him at a distance, watch him from corners, and sometimes even approach when he wasn't paying attention. Their trust was growing, and with it, his confidence. He knew he was no longer alone. The creatures, in their own way, were becoming his friends, his companions, and his teachers. Even with the challenges, he felt alive in a way he hadn't before. The teasing, the laughter, the mockery, all of it faded into the background. He had found a purpose that was entirely his own. Every scratch, every hiss, every movement of a tail or flick of an ear was a lesson. Every vibration, every hum, every glance from a creature was a clue. He was piecing together a puzzle that no human had solved before, and the thrill of discovery drove him forward. By the end of this stage in his journey, the boy had changed. He was quieter, more thoughtful, and more confident in his own mind. He no longer sought approval from those who mocked him. Instead, he focused on understanding, observing, and connecting. The alien feline beasts had become his world, a world full of mysteries, lessons, and hidden languages waiting to be unlocked. And he knew, deep down, that this was only the beginning. Little did he know that his persistence, patience, and curiosity would soon lead to an event that no one could ignore. An event that would finally show the world that the language of the alien feline beasts was not a dream, not a coincidence, but a real system of communication, waiting for someone brave and dedicated enough to understand it. The boy's quiet study of the alien feline beasts had been going on for months when something happened that changed everything. It was a day like any other, with the hum of the station machines in the background and the usual commotion of people going about their routines. The boy was sitting near one of the observation zones, notebook in hand, recording subtle vibrations he had noticed in the adult beasts. The cubs were playing nearby, weaving between legs and leaping over small obstacles with astonishing grace. He loved these moments, when he could watch without being rushed, when he could see their world unfold in front of him like a delicate, living puzzle dot. Then came the accident. A cargo bay door had not been properly secured, and a young cub, one of the ones he had been observing closely, slipped through a small opening. Before anyone could notice, the cub was trapped in a narrow gap between machinery and a storage container. Its small body struggled, hitting the metal walls and letting out high-pitched cries of panic. The sound echoed through the bay, drawing the attention of nearby workers and security personnel. Everyone froze. The cub was terrified, its tiny body twisting and turning. Its fur bristled, and it let out a frightened hiss. Some adults hesitated, unsure how to approach. They knew these creatures could be dangerous when frightened. One wrong move, one sudden gesture, could make the cub lash out, injuring itself or anyone nearby. The cub's mother was nowhere in sight, and the boy could see panic rising in the air as people debated what to do. Without thinking, the boy stepped forward. His heart pounded, and his hands were slightly trembling, but he felt calm inside. He knew he could help. He had spent months studying the subtle signals that calmed the cubs. He remembered the low vibrations he had recorded, the gentle hums, and the slow movements that reassured the younger beasts. He crouched down at a safe distance, making sure he did not appear threatening. "Stay calm," he whispered to himself, though the cub could not understand words. Instead, he focused on the gestures and vibrations he had learned. He tapped lightly on the floor, the way he had seen older adults do to signal safety. He let out a soft, continuous hum, replicating the pattern that the cubs had responded to many times before. His movements were deliberate, slow, and careful. The cub froze at first, its small body tense, its eyes wide with fear. The adults around the boy held their breath, some doubtful, some curious. They had seen him study the creatures, but no one had ever witnessed him actually try to communicate in such a situation. It seemed impossible. Then something remarkable happened. The cub's trembling slowed. Its ears tilted slightly, and its body relaxed just a little. The boy continued, mimicking the calming sequence he had observed in the adult feline beasts. Tail flicks, gentle vibrations, and a soft, repetitive hum. Slowly, the cub inched closer to him, trusting the signals even though it did not know him personally. The adults watched in disbelief. They could not understand what was happening. The boy, who had been mocked for months, had somehow managed to calm a frightened alien creature in a situation that could have ended badly. The cub, sensing the safety in the boy's gestures, stopped struggling entirely. It nuzzled against his hand, a small gesture of trust that seemed almost miraculous. "Unbelievable," muttered one of the scientists. Another whispered, "Did he talk to it?" They didn't know how else to describe what had just occurred. The boy, however, did not feel any pride. He felt relief. He had learned to use his patience, observation, and understanding to help the cub. It was not about showing off. It was about connection. Carefully, he guided the cub away from the machinery, using the same sequence of gestures and vibrations. Each small movement was precise, measured, and gentle. He never rushed, never forced, never touched the cub in a way that could scare it. Slowly, the cub moved toward safety, following his signals. When it was finally free, it curled up at a safe distance, looking back at him with eyes that seemed to recognize him. The adults moved closer, still cautious. "How did you do that?" one asked, barely hiding awe. The boy shrugged. "I just watched them," he said quietly. "I noticed how they signal each other, how they calm each other. I tried to copy it." The adults were stunned into silence. For months, they had dismissed his obsession as a hobby, but now they could see that it had a real, practical purpose. The incident spread quickly through the settlement. Workers and scientists who had doubted him now looked at him with curiosity and respect. Still, the boy did not care about recognition. He only cared that the cub was safe and that he had applied his understanding successfully. It was the first time he realized that his studies were not just about observing for fun. They could save lives, prevent accidents, and build trust between humans and the alien feline beasts. The cub, now calm, stayed near him for the rest of the day, even following him quietly as he moved around the observation area. It seemed to sense that he was different, that he understood in a way others did not. For the boy, it was a profound moment. He felt a connection with the creatures that went beyond notes, diagrams, or sketches. He had entered their world in a small but meaningful way, and they had accepted him. Over the next few days, the boy noticed subtle changes in the behavior of the cub and other young beasts. They seemed to watch him more closely, responding to his presence with trust rather than fear. Adults noticed it too, though they didn't fully understand how it happened. Some of the scientists began asking questions, curious about the methods the boy had used. For the first time, he felt that his knowledge was valued, even if only slightly. But the boy also realized that this was just the beginning. One incident, one successful rescue, did not mean he had mastered their language. He had only glimpsed a small part of it, and there was much more to learn. The gestures, vibrations, and sounds were only pieces of a larger system. To truly understand these creatures, he would need to spend years observing, testing, and carefully decoding their signals. He returned to his notebooks with renewed determination. Every detail of the rescue, every reaction of the cub, every subtle change in posture was recorded meticulously. He began cross-referencing these observations with the notes he had made previously, looking for patterns he had missed. Slowly, he started to see sequences of signals that formed coherent messages. It was like discovering a secret code that only he had the patience to decipher. The teasing and mocking from other children continued, but it no longer affected him. Their words were background noise compared to the work he was doing and the connection he had built with the creatures. He knew the truth of his observations, and that knowledge gave him confidence. He had proven to himself that what he was doing mattered, and that sometimes being different was the key to seeing things others could not. Even the adults who had doubted him began to pay attention. They were curious about the patterns he had observed, the vibrations he could replicate, and the subtle gestures that calmed the cub. Some began asking him to demonstrate what he had learned, and each time he did, the cubs responded just as he predicted. Slowly, respect replaced doubt, though the boy never sought it. He was driven not by praise, but by understanding and connection. This experience marked a turning point. The boy realized that his love for the creatures, his patience, and his careful observation were not just hobbies, they were skills. Skills that could help both humans and beasts coexist safely and peacefully. He also realized that others' mockery was not a barrier, but a challenge. The more they laughed, the more determined he became to prove that understanding was possible. By the end of this eventful week, the boy had changed. He no longer felt alone, even if the children still mocked him. He had all eyes in the creatures themselves, and their trust was more meaningful than any approval from peers. He had also discovered something vital. Communication was not about force. It was about understanding, patience, and empathy. The rescue of the cub had shown him that knowledge without compassion was meaningless. From that day forward, the boy's observations became more focused, more intentional. Every sound, every tail flick, every vibration was studied with care. He began experimenting with sequences, testing which gestures elicited certain responses and which did not. Slowly, the pieces of the puzzle were coming together, and he knew that with time, patience, and continued study, he could unlock something extraordinary, the full language of the alien, feline beasts. The cub rescue had proven one thing beyond doubt. The boy's work mattered. What others had dismissed as childish curiosity was, in fact, a bridge between two species that had never truly understood one another. And the boy, once mocked and doubted, had become the first person to walk across that bridge. After the cub rescue, the boy's confidence grew, but he knew he had only scratched the surface. The incident had shown him that the creatures could respond to him, that they could understand the subtle gestures, hums, and vibrations he produced. Yet he also realized that this was just one small interaction. There were hundreds of signals, hundreds of combinations, and hundreds of moments he had yet to understand. The alien feline beasts had a language of their own, a complex system of communication that went beyond sounds and gestures, and he was determined to decode it fully. He returned to his notebooks with renewed focus. Every observation, every movement of the tail, the ears, and the body, every vibration, was recorded meticulously. He began to notice sequences that repeated more often than others. Some signals seemed to be used when the creatures were curious, others when they were frightened or playful. He started to group them, creating categories and symbols, building what he hoped would eventually become a dictionary of their language. To make progress, he also began experimenting carefully. With the cubs, he tried slight variations of gestures and vibrations to see how they responded. A small tail flick combined with a soft hum meant safe. Changing the tone slightly could signal, come closer. He realized that the creature's language was layered. A single gesture or sound could have one meaning, but a combination of gestures, vibrations, and postures formed complete sentences or messages. It was more complicated than anything he had expected, but also exciting. At first, his experiments were small and cautious. He would approach a cub while the adults were nearby, imitating signals he had seen in their interactions. Sometimes it worked perfectly. The cub would respond exactly as he predicted. Other times, he misread the signs, and the cub would retreat, flicking its tail in frustration. Each mistake taught him something new. He learned to adjust his tone, the speed of the vibrations, and the angle of his body to convey the correct message. Slowly, he was building a vocabulary, a set of rules for communication that no human had ever discovered before. The adults who had doubted him began to notice. A few scientists approached him one day, curious about the notes and diagrams he had created. They asked him to explain what he had been doing, expecting some childish experiment or guesswork. Instead, he demonstrated a sequence he had observed and copied. The cub responded immediately, following his gestures and vibrations precisely. The adults were stunned. For the first time, they saw that the boy's observations were not random. He had discovered something real, something practical, something that could change the way humans interacted with these creatures. The boy, however, was not interested in praise. He was focused on understanding. He spent hours every day observing the creatures, writing, drawing, and testing his ideas. He noticed patterns in the adults' communication too, not just the cubs. The adults used more complex sequences, combining tail movements, ear twitches, hums, and body vibrations in ways that expressed not just basic emotions, but intentions, warnings, and instructions. It was as if they had a fully developed language, one that humans had never been able to perceive. He began to organize his notes carefully. Each gesture, each vibration, each tail flick had a symbol in his notebook. He wrote down what he thought it meant, what response it produced, and the context in which it was used. Slowly, a system emerged. It was messy at first, full of corrections and crossouts, but over time, it became more structured, more readable. He even started to predict how creatures would respond in new situations based on the signals he had decoded. One evening, while observing a group of adult beasts interacting near the outer docking area, he realized something extraordinary. They were communicating in long sequences, repeating gestures and vibrations that seemed to form full statements. He noticed that a low hum combined with a specific tail flick and a tilt of the head seemed to mean, "Follow me." Another combination appeared to mean, "Stay safe." The boy's heart raced as he wrote everything down. He was beginning to understand full sentences, full messages, not just isolated signals. Excited by this breakthrough, he began practicing sequences on the cubs. He combined gestures, hums, and vibrations in new ways. And to his amazement, the cubs responded exactly as he predicted. The creatures were not just reacting randomly, they were understanding, following instructions, and even showing emotions that matched his signals. The boy realized he had crossed a threshold. He was no longer merely observing. He was communicating, truly and intentionally, with a species no human had ever spoken to before. The breakthrough gave him a new perspective. He began thinking about the implications. If he could communicate with these creatures, he could prevent accidents like the one in the cargo bay. He could help humans and creatures coexist more safely. He could teach others how to understand them. And most importantly, he could prove to the world that the language of the alien feline beasts was real, not a figment of imagination. Despite this progress, the boy continued to face mockery. Some children still laughed at his notes and symbols, calling them scribbles and nonsense. A few adults were skeptical, dismissing his success as coincidence. But the boy paid no attention. He knew the creatures were responding, and that was proof enough. Each successful interaction strengthened his resolve. Each response from a creature was a confirmation that he was on the right path. The boy also began experimenting with new tools. He created a small device to measure vibrations more precisely, helping him understand signals that were too subtle for humans to feel naturally. He tested it carefully, recording every reaction, every response. The device confirmed what he had suspected. The creature's signals were complex, layered, and precise. They were capable of communication far beyond what anyone had imagined. Over time, the boy started to notice that different creatures had slightly different accents in their signals. Some adult beasts used stronger vibrations, while others preferred subtler ones. Some cubs responded better to certain sequences than others. He adapted his approach, learning to communicate not just with a species as a whole, but with individuals, recognizing their unique patterns and preferences. This made his understanding even deeper, more nuanced, and more powerful. The breakthrough also changed the way the creatures treated him. The cubs now approached him eagerly, following his gestures and vibrations without hesitation. Adult beasts began to acknowledge him with subtle signals of recognition, tail flicks, ear tilts, and even gentle hums. The boy felt a growing sense of respect and trust from the creatures. For the first time, he was not just an observer. He was a participant in their world, a partner in communication. The boy's family noticed the change too. He was more confident, more focused, and happier. He shared small parts of his discoveries with them, showing how the creatures responded to his gestures and hums. They were amazed, but also cautious. They reminded him to be careful, to respect the creatures, and to continue observing patiently. The boy listened, but he was also eager to keep exploring. Every day brought new insights, new patterns, and new opportunities to test his understanding. By the end of this period, the boy had achieved something extraordinary. He had decoded basic phrases, sequences, and messages. He could communicate intent, emotion, and simple instructions. The creatures responded reliably, and the patterns were consistent. He had laid the foundation for a full understanding of their language. What had once seemed impossible, a human communicating with an alien species, was now becoming real. The breakthrough gave him hope and a sense of purpose. He knew that his journey was far from over. There were still many signals to decode, many sequences to understand, and many interactions to observe. But he had proven to himself that his work was meaningful. He had shown that patience, observation, and respect could bridge a gap that others had assumed was unbridgeable. Most importantly, he realized that understanding the creatures required more than intelligence. It required empathy. He could not force them to respond. He could only listen, observe, and communicate with care. The breakthrough had taught him patience, humility, and the power of quiet dedication. It was a lesson he would carry forward as he continued his journey, one step closer to fully decoding the language of the alien feline beasts. By the time this stage of his study ended, the boy had changed. He was no longer the mocked, quiet child who hid in the shadows with his notebooks. He was a young communicator, a bridge between species, and a pioneer in understanding a language no human had ever learned. And though others had doubted him, the creature's trust and responsiveness were proof enough. He had crossed a threshold, and the rest of his journey promised discoveries even more extraordinary. The boy had been observing and studying the alien feline beasts for a long time now, and his understanding of their language had grown immensely. He knew the basic phrases, the subtle signals, and even some of the complex sequences that the adults used to communicate. He could approach a frightened cub and calm it with a combination of hums, tail flicks, and vibrations. He could signal intentions, express emotions, and even instruct the creatures in small ways. But nothing in his experience had prepared him for the challenge that was about to come. It began with a warning from the station monitors. An unexpected system error had caused a disturbance near one of the docking areas where the alien feline beasts often gathered. Humans and beasts alike were on edge. The creatures, sensing danger from the vibrations in the station, began to gather together, their movements tense and defensive. A few of the adults emitted low growls and hums, signaling to the cubs that something was wrong. The young ones huddled together, their bodies trembling. Panic started to spread. The boy was nearby when it began. He could see the fear in the cubs' eyes, the tension in the adult beast's posture. People were unsure what to do. Some wanted to approach and try to calm the creatures, but others hesitated, worried that any sudden move could trigger aggression. The situation was tense, and it was clear that if things escalated, both humans and beasts could be hurt. Without hesitation, the boy stepped forward. He knew he had a chance to use everything he had learned, everything he had studied for months, to prevent a disaster. He crouched low, keeping a safe distance, and began to observe the signals the creatures were sending to each other. The adult beasts were trying to communicate, but the humans nearby couldn't understand them. The cubs were frightened, unsure of what to do. And in that moment, the boy realized that he was the only one who could bridge the gap. He began with a soft hum, matching the vibrations he had observed when the creatures were trying to calm each other. He flicked his hands and moved his body in small gestures that signaled safety and reassurance. At first, some of the adults were hesitant, their tails twitching and ears back. But the boy remained calm. He repeated the sequences slowly, patiently, focusing on precision. Gradually, the cubs began to respond. They stopped trembling, their small tails curling slightly as they listened. The adults noticed the boy's gestures and began to mirror them, signaling to the cubs that it was safe. The tense growls softened into low hums, and the creatures' postures relaxed. The boy could feel the shift in the air. The panic that had filled the docking area slowly dissolved. The humans around him were astonished. They had watched the boy work with the cubs before, but nothing on this scale had ever happened. They could not believe that a human could communicate with the creatures so effectively, especially in a crisis situation. Yet the evidence was clear. The boy's calm, deliberate signals had prevented chaos. The cubs were safe, the adults were calm, and the emergency that had threatened to escalate had been resolved. The boy continued to communicate, combining multiple gestures and vibrations to ensure that the creatures understood completely. He guided the adults away from the humans, signaling that there was no threat. He reassured the cubs that they could move freely and safely. With each sequence, the creatures responded predictably and calmly, showing trust in the boy that they had never shown before. As the situation stabilized, the boy realized the importance of what he had done. His understanding of the creature's language had not only allowed him to prevent panic, but had also demonstrated that communication was possible. He had become a true bridge between humans and the alien feline beasts. His months of observation, patience, and careful study had paid off in the most meaningful way imaginable. After the crisis, the humans began to approach him, asking questions and seeking explanations. Scientists who had once dismissed him were now curious and respectful. They wanted to understand how he had been able to communicate with the creatures so effectively. The boy explained carefully, demonstrating some of the sequences he had used and showing how gestures, hums, and vibrations could convey different meanings. The humans listened intently, many taking notes and asking for clarification. The creatures, meanwhile, continued to display trust and recognition. The cubs stayed close to the boy, rubbing against his legs and responding eagerly to his signals. The adult beasts acknowledged him with subtle gestures of respect, tail flicks, ear tilts, and soft hums. The boy realized that the relationship he had built was mutual. The creatures had come to trust him, just as he had learned to understand and respect them. Over the next few days, the boy continued to refine his skills. He practiced new sequences, tested combinations, and observed the creature's responses to different signals. He began to decode more complex messages, understanding not just emotions or intentions, but also warnings, instructions, and social cues. His understanding of their language was becoming more sophisticated, more nuanced, and more reliable. The boy also began to teach others, carefully and slowly. He showed trusted humans how to approach the creatures without causing fear, how to use gestures and vibrations to communicate basic messages, and how to observe patterns that indicated mood and intention. His work began to change the way humans interacted with the creatures, reducing misunderstandings and improving safety across the station. Despite the respect he was gaining, the boy remained humble. He knew that communication with the creatures required more than gestures and vibrations. It required patience, empathy, and attention to detail. He continued to observe quietly, taking meticulous notes and refining his understanding. He knew that the creature's language was vast, complex, and still only partially understood, and he was committed to learning every part of it. The crisis had also taught him an important lesson about trust. The creatures responded to him not because of force or authority, but because of patience and understanding. He had earned their trust through careful observation, respect, and consistent, gentle communication. This trust was fragile but powerful, and he realized that maintaining it required ongoing care and attention. One evening, after a particularly long day of observation and practice, the boy sat quietly with the cubs, humming softly and moving his hands in familiar sequences. The cubs leaned against him, relaxed and content, while the adults watched from a distance. He reflected on how far he had come from a lonely, mocked child with a notebook of strange symbols to someone who could prevent panic, build trust, and communicate with an entirely alien species. It was a journey of patience, courage, and quiet determination. He knew there would be more challenges ahead. The creature's language was vast, and there were still signals and sequences he had not yet decoded. New situations would arise, new crises might test his understanding, and there would always be skeptics and doubters. But he felt ready. The experience of the recent crisis had shown him that he could rise to any challenge, that his knowledge and patience were real, and that he had a purpose that mattered. The boy's work began to draw attention from all corners of the settlement. People started to watch his interactions with the creatures, curious and respectful. Some offered help, others simply observed. Slowly, the culture around the creatures began to change. Humans treated them with more care, more patience, and more understanding. Conflicts and accidents became less frequent, and the creatures responded in kind, showing trust and calm. The boy's influence was growing, not through force or authority, but through knowledge, respect, and communication. Through it all, the boy remained focused on the creatures themselves. He continued to observe, to practice, and to refine his understanding. He realized that communication was a continuous process, one that required constant attention and adaptation. Every day brought new insights, new challenges, and new opportunities to learn. He approached each moment with curiosity and care, knowing that the creature's language was alive, dynamic, and ever-changing. By the end of this period, the boy had achieved something extraordinary. He had faced a real crisis, prevented panic, and maintained trust between humans and alien feline beasts. He had demonstrated the power of understanding, patience, and communication. And he had shown that one person, even a young child, could make a difference when armed with knowledge, empathy, and courage. The experience left him stronger, more confident, and more determined. He had seen firsthand the results of his dedication and hard work. He knew that his journey was far from over, but he also knew that he had crossed a significant threshold. He was no longer just a student of the creature's language. He was a communicator, a bridge, and a protector. The lessons he had learned during this crisis would guide him in the future. As he continued to explore the depths of the alien feline beasts, language, and build connections that had once seemed impossible. And so, the boy continued, quietly and patiently, observing, learning, and communicating. Each day brought new discoveries, new insights, and new opportunities to strengthen the bond between humans and the creatures. His journey was far from complete, but the recent events had proven one thing beyond doubt. With patience, understanding, and courage, even the most extraordinary challenges could be overcome. After the crisis had passed, and the boy had successfully guided the alien feline beasts through the danger, his life began to change in ways he had never imagined. The creatures, once mysterious and untouchable, now treated him as part of their world. The cubs followed him wherever he went, brushing against his legs and responding eagerly to his gestures, hums, and vibrations. Even the adults acknowledged his presence with subtle nods, tail flicks, and soft hums. They no longer saw him as a human intruder, but as a partner, someone who understood their language and respected their ways. The boy's reputation began to grow throughout the settlement. People who had once mocked him now approached with curiosity and admiration. Scientists wanted to study the methods he had used to communicate. Security personnel and caretakers asked for advice on how to interact safely with the creatures. The boy, however, remained humble. He explained carefully, demonstrating sequences of gestures, vibrations, and hums that the creatures had responded to. He emphasized patience, observation, and respect, insisting that anyone who wanted to communicate with the creatures had to approach them gently and thoughtfully. Despite the attention he was receiving, the boy remained focused on the creatures themselves. He continued his careful observations, noting every subtle movement, every small hum, and every sequence of signals. He refined his understanding, tested new combinations, and recorded his findings meticulously. He had come a long way from the lonely child who had been mocked for his notebooks filled with strange symbols. Now he was a student and a teacher, a communicator and a bridge between two worlds. The bond he had formed with the creatures grew stronger each day. He discovered that they not only responded to him, but seemed to seek him out. Cub after cub would approach when he arrived, nuzzling his hands and brushing against his legs. Adult beasts would move slightly closer, their ears tilted in recognition, their eyes following his movements. The boy realized that trust had been earned, and that trust was powerful. It was a bond that could prevent misunderstandings, reduce fear, and create harmony between humans and creatures alike. With his newfound influence, the boy began to make small changes across the settlement. He taught others how to observe and respond to the creatures, showing them that even minor gestures or vibrations could communicate meaning. People learned to watch tail flicks, ear positions, and body movements, understanding when the creatures were curious, playful, or frightened. Over time, the atmosphere in the settlement shifted. There was less fear, less chaos, and more cooperation between humans and beasts. The boy's notebooks became a treasure trove of knowledge. They contained detailed observations, diagrams, and sequences, documenting the language of the creatures in a way no human had ever done before. Scientists were amazed at the depth and accuracy of his work. They realized that he had not only observed patterns, but had understood and decoded elements of a complex communication system. The boy, who had once been mocked and dismissed, had become a pioneer. His work was proof that curiosity, patience, and empathy could achieve what many adults thought impossible. As the boy grew more confident, he began experimenting with teaching the creatures simple human gestures as well. He found that they could learn to respond to certain visual cues, such as hand signals, in addition to their own language. This two-way understanding allowed for more effective communication, and it strengthened the bond between humans and beasts. The boy realized that communication was not just about speaking one language, but about creating a shared understanding, a connection built on trust and respect. Even outside of formal experiments, the boy spent time simply enjoying the company of the creatures. He would sit among the cubs, humming softly and moving his hands in familiar sequences, while the adults observed from a distance. These quiet moments were precious. They were a reminder of how far he had come, from a lonely, mocked child to someone who had earned the respect of both humans and alien creatures. The boy's family watched these developments with pride and amazement. They had always supported him, even when others didn't understand his fascination. Now they could see the results of his dedication and patience. He had grown not only in knowledge, but in confidence, empathy, and maturity. He had learned to face challenges calmly, to earn trust, and to communicate in ways that others had thought impossible. One day, a group of scientists asked him to lead a session on communicating with the creatures. They wanted him to demonstrate his methods, explain his observations, and guide others in practicing patience and understanding. The boy agreed, carefully planning how to present the material in a way that would be safe for both humans and beasts. The session was a success. Participants were amazed as cubs and adults responded reliably to his gestures and vibrations. It became clear that his methods could transform the settlement's approach to working with the creatures. Despite all the attention and recognition, the boy never let pride cloud his focus. He continued to spend hours observing, refining, and learning. Each day, he discovered something new, a subtle variation in a tail flick, a different pattern of hums, a small gesture that conveyed a unique meaning. The creature's language was vast, and he knew there was still much to learn. But he also knew that he had achieved something extraordinary. He had built a bridge between two species, one that others could now cross with care and understanding. As time passed, The boy became a symbol of patience, empathy, and determination. The children who had once mocked him began to watch in awe. They saw the creatures responding to him, saw the trust he had earned, and began to understand that knowledge and respect could accomplish what teasing and ridicule could never achieve. Slowly, some of them began to join him in observation, learning from his methods and developing their own understanding of the creatures. The bond between humans and alien feline beasts strengthened under the boy's guidance. Accidents became less frequent, misunderstandings were avoided, and the settlement operated more smoothly. The creatures were no longer mysterious, untouchable beings, but partners and companions. They had come to trust humans, and humans had learned to trust them. And at the center of this transformation was the boy, whose patience, dedication, and empathy had made it possible. The boy often reflected on his journey. He thought about the early days, when he was mocked, ignored, and doubted. He remembered the long hours of observation, the careful notes, and the experiments that sometimes failed. He recalled the cub rescue, the crisis at the docking area, and the moments when he realized that the creatures could understand him. Each memory reminded him of how far he had come, and how much patience, courage, and care it had taken to reach this point. He also thought about the lessons he had learned. He understood now that true communication required more than words or gestures. It required empathy, observation, and trust. It required patience, humility, and a willingness to learn from mistakes. And most importantly, it required respect for the creatures, for the humans, and for the process of discovery itself. These lessons had shaped him, not only as a communicator, but as a person. By the end of his journey, the boy had achieved what many had thought impossible. He had decoded significant parts of the creatures' language, earned their trust, and built a lasting connection between humans and alien feline beasts. He had shown that one person, even a young child, could make a difference through patience, observation, and empathy. And he had created a legacy that would benefit the settlement for years to come. The creatures continued to follow him, respond to his signals, and show subtle gestures of recognition. The humans continued to learn, practice, and refine their own understanding. And the boy, now older, wiser, and confident, continued his work, knowing that communication, trust, and understanding were lifelong pursuits. He had crossed a threshold that no one had crossed before, and he had done it with patience, care, and an unwavering belief in the power of connection. In the end, the boy's story was one of courage, curiosity, and compassion. He had been mocked and doubted, but he had remained true to his passion. He had faced challenges and crises, but he had remained calm and patient. And he had built bridges where others saw walls, proving that understanding and empathy could overcome fear and ignorance. The bond he formed with the creatures endured. They were no longer strangers or mysteries, but companions, friends, and teachers. And the boy, once lonely and mocked, had become a pioneer, a guide, and a symbol of the extraordinary things that patience, observation, and kindness can achieve. The settlement was forever changed, not by force or authority, but by the quiet dedication of a boy who chose to see, listen, and understand. And so the boy continued, not seeking fame or recognition, but simply continuing his work, observing, learning, and communicating. Each day brought new discoveries, new patterns, and new opportunities to strengthen the bond he had created. He had unlocked a language, bridged a gap, and shown that with patience, understanding, and care, even the impossible could become real. The boy had started as a lonely child, mocked and dismissed, but he ended as a bridge between worlds, a teacher, and a friend to creatures that no one else could understand. His journey was complete, yet ongoing, a testament to the power of curiosity, empathy, and the belief that understanding